Have you ever suddenly felt worse at playing a game? Your aim feels worse, your reactions became slower, and nothing really works. So naturally, you start looking for problems inside of the game. Maybe something changed. Or maybe you simply lost your skill. But what if the game isn't actually the problem here? Because your performance doesn't start when you launch the game. It starts hours, even days before you even start playing. Your sleep, hydration, movement, and even screen time matter a lot. And the interesting part is how easily we ignore those factors. Because when gaming performance drops, we usually blame the game. We rarely question the condition we bring into this game. So before blaming your skill, let's check the baseline first. Let's start with probably the biggest factor: your sleep. And I'm not just talking about one terrible night. A famous controlled study by Dongen and his colleagues stated this: participants receive 4, 6 or 8 hours of sleep daily. And researchers repeated this experiment for 14 days under repeated conditions. The 8-hour group kept their performance at around the same baseline. But with 6 hours, their performance progressively decayed over those days. And that's what makes this study so important. Because 6 hours doesn't feel like sleep deprivation. For a lot of people, 6 hours is completely normal. You wake up, go to work and feel completely functional. But after 2 weeks, some measured deficits approach levels seen after staying awake for roughly an entire night. And now comes the psychologically interesting part. Participants didn't feel nearly as impaired as they actually were. Their objective performance kept declining through their restricted sleep, but their subjective tiredness didn't rise at the same speed. Basically, their perception started adapting to the circumstances. However, their actual performance didn't adapt nearly the same way. And that's a dangerous combination when judging yourself. Because you might genuinely believe that you're doing fine. Meanwhile, you're comparing your performance to your rested baseline. Now think about what that means for gaming. Maybe you didn't suddenly become worse this week. Maybe you simply slept for 6 hours this entire week. Individually, each of those nights doesn't feel particularly problematic, but together they can create a completely different baseline. So don't only ask how you slept last night. Ask yourself how you've been sleeping through the entire week. Because sometimes your skill didn't disappear at all. You're simply asking your tired brain to perform at peak performance. Next, let's talk about food and hydration. And food might actually matter less than you think. Because people often assume that missing one meal destroys their entire performance. But a large 2025 meta-analysis found something surprisingly different. It included more than 3,400 participants across dozens of studies. The typical fasting period was around 12 hours long, and cognitive performance was basically unchanged during that period. So if you haven't eaten for 6 hours, your brain probably hasn't stopped functioning. That doesn't mean, however, that food isn't important for your health. And obviously, if you feel terrible because you're hungry, you should eat something. But missing one meal doesn't automatically mean that you're performing badly. Hydration, however, gives us a much clearer answer, because dehydration isn't often experienced as an extreme thirst. And people seem surprisingly bad at recognizing those symptoms. One study surveyed around 400 people about dehydration symptoms. Around 84% correctly associated their symptoms with thirst, but fewer than half connected it with fatigue. Similar numbers recognize headaches or concentration problems as similar signs. And controlled studies show why it actually matters. In one experiment featuring young men, mild dehydration increased fatigue. They have lost around 1.6% of their body weight. So here's the important part for us. Sometimes you know what thirst feels like, but you might not recognize hydration as the problem. When you're feeling tired, sluggish, unfocused, or generally terrible, that's where it's incredibly easy to misinterpret yourself. You think you slept badly last night. Maybe you blame the weather or a stressful day. Or maybe you simply decide that your energy today is gone. And all of those explanations might actually be correct. But hydration is an incredibly easy variable to test. So next time you feel unusually tired or sluggish, drink something. You're not trying to magically boost your performance. You're simply checking if you misunderstood one of your symptoms. Now let's talk about something gamers completely ignore. Your brain might be playing, but your body still matters. And for this one, we even have research for gamers. A randomized study followed 83 young FPS players. One group exercised 3 times each week for around 6 weeks. Afterwards, their flicking performance increased over 16%. Their tracking improved over 13%. Decision making improved over 10%. And their reaction speed became around 8% faster. That's not some abstract memory test from unrelated research. These were actual abilities directly relevant for FPS performance. So physical activity can actually translate into skill in gaming. But please don't misunderstand what I'm telling you here. I'm not telling you to destroy yourself in the gym, because more exercise doesn't automatically mean better performance. And personally, I've noticed this extremely myself. If I completely destroy myself during a Saturday morning workout, I can basically forget serious gaming throughout the entire day. I'm tired, slower, and simply don't perform at the same baseline I usually do. And there's research that states that this isn't that weird at all. Studies using exhaustive exercise found temporary drops in cognitive performance. Working memory, for example, can suffer immediately after exhaustion. So the solution isn't exercising as hard as you possibly can. The actual lesson is much simpler than that. Move your body, but don't exhaust it. And you absolutely don't need a gym for this. Research on long sitting periods actually makes this much clearer to understand. Studies have tested what happens when sitting is interrupted. And even short movement breaks can provide measurable cognitive improvement. We're talking about things as simply as walking a few steps, or taking your dog outside for a walk, kick a ball, stretch, take stairs, or simply do anything that is physical activity. The point isn't turning yourself into an athlete. The point is breaking hours of complete physical inactivity. So if you've been sitting for several hours, try it. Move for 5 minutes, then come back afterwards. And simply pay attention to how you feel. Because sometimes movement is exactly what your brain needed. And now we reach something people always completely underestimate. Just because you're relaxing doesn't automatically mean that you're recovering, especially when your relaxation happens behind another screen. And there's actually a really interesting experiment about this. Researchers gave participants around 45 minutes on their phone. One group simply used their phone like they usually would, and most of their time was spent on social media. Another group watched a nature documentary about the same time. Before and afterwards, researchers tested different cognitive abilities. Let's start with the first result. After normal smartphone usage, reaction time became around 3.6% slower. Now let's be honest here. 3% doesn't particularly sound problematic, right? That's probably not the reason why you're performing badly. And if this was the only result, I would have completely ignored it. But reaction speed wasn't the interesting part about the study. In another study, inhibition errors were tested as well. And inhibition errors have been increased by around 39%. And don't worry, inhibition errors sound more complicated than they actually are. It's basically your ability to stop an automatic response. Your brain receives an input, but reacting to it would be wrong. And games, like Uncharted as example, constantly require this type of control. Don't press the button yet, and don't immediately respond to every information. Sometimes the correct action is deliberately not reacting at all. And now, 39% do feel pretty important, right? But there's another reason why I like this experiment this much. The phone didn't necessarily feel mentally exhausting. People were comfortable and were simply enjoying entertainment. That's exactly why we use our phones during breaks. Social media, YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, you name it. You lay on your couch and feel like you're recovering. But your brain is still processing new information. A new video, a new comment, a new notification, a new topic, or new stimulants. But recovery and entertainment aren't necessarily the same thing. And the distinction is incredibly easy to overlook. Imagine you've already worked or studied the entire day. You've spent hours processing information and making decisions. Then you come home and spend another 2 hours scrolling through your phone. And then you start gaming expecting a full 100% performance. Maybe your brain simply hasn't had the break yet. And again, I'm not telling you to delete social media. I'm telling you to test another variable. Before playing, take around 20 minutes without any kind of screen. Take a shower, walk outside, or simply listen to music. Do something that doesn't constantly demand another visual response. Then start your game and simply see how you feel. Because lying on your couch doesn't automatically mean that you're recovering. So now, let's forget the studies for a second. Let me ask you a few simple questions. How have you actually been sleeping this week? Have you been drinking enough throughout the day? How long have you been sitting today? When did you last properly move your body? How much screen time have you had today? And are you mentally exhausted throughout something outside of the game itself? Now think back to when you last performed well. Did you actually feel the same way back then? If the answer is no, why expect a similar result? Everything we've talked about today can change your current baseline, and none of those things mean that you automatically lost skill. So next time your performance feels completely off, don't immediately assume that you have become bad. Go through these questions and check your conditions first. Maybe one of those variables changed without you noticing it. Maybe you're comparing two different versions of yourself. And that's the important lesson behind this entire video.